The old animal shelter on Maple Street was always filled with barking dogs, meowing cats, and the loud echoes of footsteps moving down the concrete hallways. But hidden in the very last kennel, far from the noise and excitement, sat a quiet German shepherd that no one seemed to notice. His name was Duke, and the workers of the shelter didn't know much about where he came from or what he had been through. Duke never barked or whined. Instead, he curled up tightly in the farthest corner of his kennel and stared at the wall all day long. His fur was dirty and matted, his ribs stuck out a little too far, and his eyes looked tired and full of sadness. People came into the shelter almost every day, hoping to adopt a happy puppy or a cute kitten, but no one ever stopped to look at Duke. When someone passed his kennel, he didn't stand up, wag his tail, or even lift his head. He just stayed still like a statue. Shelter workers tried to cheer him up with soft blankets, squeaky toys, and treats, but Duke never took interest in any of them. It was like he had given up on people, like his heart had been broken a long time ago, and didn't know how to feel anymore. Some of the younger workers whispered stories about Duke, saying he might have been a police dog who lost his partner during a scary mission. Others believed he came from an abusive home where he had been hurt or left behind when his family moved away. But no one really knew the truth because Duke never gave them any clues, never looked anyone in the eye, and never made a sound. Day after day, week after week, Duke stayed in that corner, moving only to drink a little water or lay his head down to rest. The shelter listed him as special needs, and most visitors didn't even ask about him once they saw how quiet and distant he was. Some people thought he was broken, damaged beyond repair, a dog too far gone to be loved again, or to trust another human. But deep down, even if no one could see it, Duke still had a tiny piece of hope buried inside him, waiting for something or someone to bring it back to life. He didn't ask for much, just a little kindness, a little patience, and a chance to feel safe again in a world that had been too cruel. Every night, he curled up tightly in the shadows, dreaming of a life he could barely remember, a life where he had once been free and cared for. The other dogs barked for attention and wagged their tails wildly whenever someone walked by, but Duke had stopped hoping a long time ago. Still, in that quiet corner, behind the cages and forgotten toys, Duke waited, not knowing that the right person was already on their way. On a chilly Thursday morning, while light rain tapped gently on the roof of the animal shelter, a woman named Clara walked through the front doors holding a bright red umbrella and a quiet determination in her heart. Clara wasn't looking for a bouncy puppy or a fluffy kitten like most visitors. She came hoping to find a pet who truly needed a second chance. Her own dog, Max, had passed away 3 months earlier after 10 long and happy years together, and her house had felt far too quiet ever since. Clara missed the sound of paws on the hardwood floors, the soft sighs beside her bed at night, and the way Max always understood her without saying a word. Though her heart was still sore from the loss, Clara knew she had more love to give and wanted to share it with an animal who had been forgotten by the world. As she walked past rows of barking dogs and playful puppies jumping excitedly against their kennel gates, something caught her attention near the very back wall. She noticed a dark corner, mostly blocked by stacked cages and unused supplies, and asked a nearby staff member what was behind it. "Oh," the worker said gently, "that's where we keep Duke, the German Shepherd. He's been here a while and doesn't really like people." Instead of walking away like others might have, Clara asked if she could meet him, her curiosity piqued by the worker's cautious tone. The worker opened the door and led her to Duke's kennel, where the dog sat still in the same spot, his back almost touching the wall, his eyes low and empty. Clara didn't try to reach out or speak too loudly. She simply knelt in front of the kennel, her eyes soft, and whispered, "Hi there." Duke didn't move, didn't lift his head, and didn't show any reaction, but Clara stayed anyway, sitting on the floor with her umbrella resting beside her. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of them moved or spoke, but finally, Duke's eyes slowly shifted toward her, not in fear, but in quiet curiosity. Clara smiled gently but said nothing, sensing that Duke needed time to feel safe around her presence without pressure or expectations. When she stood to leave, she whispered, "I'll be back," and turned around without waiting for a response, not knowing that her words had just left a mark. The next day, and the day after that, Clara returned at the same time, wearing the same coat and sitting quietly in front of Duke's kennel without any noise. On the fourth visit, Duke sat a little closer to the front, not reaching out, but not hiding either, and his eyes followed Clara as she read a book aloud. On the fifth day, something surprising happened. Duke cautiously approached the bars and sniffed the air in Clara's direction before lying down near the front. One of the shelter staff noticed and whispered, "That's the first time he's done that in months," clearly stunned by the change in his behavior. Clara didn't smile or cheer. She just looked into Duke's eyes and whispered again, "I see you," knowing deep down that something had begun to shift. Every day for the next 2 weeks, Clara returned to the shelter without missing a single visit, always wearing the same soft smile and carrying a blue folding chair she placed near Duke's kennel. She never brought treats or toys like other visitors did. Instead, she brought quiet company and calm patience, which Duke seemed to understand more than anything else. At first, Duke stayed a few feet back, only watching Clara out of the corner of his eye, but after several days, he began sitting closer to the bars, quietly observing her without fear. Clara sometimes read from a book, sometimes just sat in peaceful silence, and once even hummed a gentle tune that made Duke lift his ears and tilt his head slightly. She spoke to him in short, gentle sentences like, "You're not alone," or "You're safe now," and though Duke didn't respond, he never looked away. One day, Clara brought a photo of her old dog Max and softly told Duke about him, the way he chased butterflies, hated baths, and loved peanut butter more than anything. Duke blinked slowly as she talked, and for the first time, he placed his chin gently on the kennel floor, completely relaxed. When Clara stood up to leave that day, Duke let out a soft whine, so quiet she almost didn't hear it, but it was the first sound he had made in front of anyone. That moment touched Clara's heart so deeply that she sat back down again, whispering, "I'm here, buddy. I'm not in a rush." The staff, who had grown used to Duke's silence, began to watch curiously, whispering among themselves about the slow but clear changes in his behavior. One of the workers asked Clara if she'd like to try walking Duke in the fenced yard outside, and she agreed, but promised not to push him too far too fast. When Duke was first let out, he froze in place and looked around nervously, but when Clara gently took the leash and stood beside him, he walked forward one cautious step at a time. During that short walk, Duke never barked or pulled, but he did something that shocked the staff. He kept glancing up at Clara like he was checking to make sure she was still there. Clara talked softly the whole time, saying things like, "We're just walking, and you're doing so great," and every time she spoke, Duke's tail moved just a little. By the third walk, Duke walked closer to Clara's side, and once even brushed his head against her leg before quickly looking away. One afternoon, as Clara prepared to leave, Duke stood at the front of his kennel and watched her go, something he had never done before. Clara turned and whispered, "I'll see you tomorrow, my friend," and Duke gave a small wag of his tail, the kind of quiet sign that meant more than words ever could. After 2 full weeks of gentle visits and tiny steps forward, Clara asked to adopt Duke, and the shelter approved it with smiles and hopeful hearts. On adoption day, Clara brought a soft new leash and a collar with Duke's name stitched in gold letters, and for the first time, Duke walked out the front door without looking back in fear. What happened next would surprise everyone, especially Clara, because once Duke left the shelter, he began to change in ways no one ever expected. When Clara brought Duke home for the very first time, she opened the front door slowly and knelt beside him so he could step in at his own pace without feeling rushed or scared. Her house was small but cozy, with warm yellow lights, soft rugs, and a fireplace that gave the living room a peaceful glow. Duke entered carefully, sniffing every corner like an explorer who wasn't sure if the place was safe yet or if it might disappear at any moment. Clara didn't call him or guide him. She simply watched from the doorway and let Duke explore on his own terms. In the middle of the living room sat a brand new dog bed, a thick blanket, and a small bowl of water, all waiting quietly just for him. Duke sniffed the bed, circled it twice, and finally lay down, letting out a slow breath like he hadn't relaxed in years. Clara sat nearby on the couch, reading quietly so he would know she was there without needing to do anything or expect anything. That first night, Duke didn't sleep in the dog bed or on the couch. He curled up in the hallway just outside Clara's bedroom door, as if guarding her from the world. In the morning, she found him in the same spot, awake and alert, his eyes watching her carefully, but without fear. Each day after that, Duke learned something new about living in a home again, like how the fridge made funny noises or how the washing machine spun loudly but didn't mean danger. He discovered that squirrels outside the window made for fun watching, and that the mail carrier always left without trying to break in. Clara never raised her voice, never forced Duke to play, and never got frustrated when he hid behind furniture or flinched at sudden sounds. She simply gave him time and patience, and in return, Duke gave her small signs that he was learning to trust, one little step at a time. He followed her from room to room, not too close but never too far, like a shadow that wanted to stay near without being noticed too much. Some nights, when the wind howled or a storm rolled in, Duke would quietly jump on Clara's bed and curl up at her feet, shaking at first but always staying. Clara never pushed him off or scolded him. Instead, she whispered, "You're okay now," until his body stopped trembling and he drifted to sleep. One afternoon, she left the front door open while carrying groceries inside, and instead of running out, Duke waited patiently by the door, watching but not moving. That small act told Clara that Duke no longer felt the need to escape because he knew this home was his and no one would ever hurt or abandon him again. After dinner, Duke gently brought her one of his toys, a squeaky green bone, and placed it at her feet, a silent gift that made her eyes fill with tears. He didn't just feel safe anymore, he felt loved, and that made all the difference in the world for a dog who once hid in a corner like he didn't matter at all. One sunny morning, about a week after Duke settled into his new life with Clara, she took him to the local vet clinic for a full checkup just to make sure he was healthy and didn't have any hidden problems that needed care. The vet, a kind older woman named Dr. Ellen, greeted Duke calmly, speaking in a soft voice and offering gentle pats to help him feel at ease. Duke sat still during the exam, nervous but cooperative, and even gave a quiet tail wag when Dr. Ellen gave him a small piece of cheese. As part of the visit, Dr. Ellen used a scanner to check if Duke had a microchip under his skin that could give any clues about his past. When the scanner beeped, she glanced at the screen and raised her eyebrows in surprise, saying, "Looks like he's chipped, and it's still active." She called a number linked to the chip, and after a few rings, a deep voice answered, asking who had Duke and where he was. Clara explained she had adopted Duke from the shelter after weeks of visiting him and earning his trust little by little. There was a long pause, and then the man on the other end said, "I thought I'd never hear about him again," with a voice that sounded full of emotion and relief. The man introduced himself as Officer Grant, a police officer from a town over 200 miles away, who said Duke had once been his canine partner. According to Grant, Duke had worked in search and rescue missions, trained to find missing people and stay calm under pressure, until one day they were in a serious car accident during a call. When Grant woke up in the hospital, Duke was gone, thrown from the vehicle and lost in the chaos, and though they searched for weeks, there were no signs of him anywhere. Grant had reported Duke missing, visited shelters, put up flyers, and contacted nearby towns, but no one had found him until now. Clara looked down at Duke, who was resting calmly by her feet, and whispered, "You've been through even more than I thought." She asked Grant if he wanted Duke back, and he replied gently, "Only if that's what Duke wants. I want him to be happy wherever that is." They agreed to meet the following weekend, so Grant could see Duke again and let the dog decide what would happen next. On the day of the visit, Clara waited in her front yard with Duke on a loose leash, and when Grant stepped out of his truck and called, "Duke," the dog froze for a second. Duke looked up, tilted his head, and took a few steps toward the man before stopping, then slowly turned to look at Clara. Clara knelt down and said, "It's okay, buddy, you get to choose," and waited without a word, holding her breath. After a long pause, Duke trotted back to Clara's side and sat beside her, pressing his shoulder gently against her leg. Grant smiled through watery eyes and said, "He's made his choice," and from that day forward, there was no more doubt. Duke was finally home for good. Life with Duke grew more peaceful with each passing day, filled with long walks by the lake, warm naps on the living room rug, and quiet evenings where Clara read books aloud while Duke rested nearby. But healing from the past isn't always a straight path, and Clara learned this one afternoon when a fire truck roared by their house, its sirens blaring suddenly and loudly. The moment the sound hit Duke's ears, he dropped to the floor as if struck, trembling all over and panting heavily, his eyes wide with fear. Clara rushed to his side, gently placing her hands on his back and whispering softly, "It's okay. It's over, you're safe now," as he shook beneath her touch. For 10 long minutes, Duke didn't move, frozen in place by a memory only he could see, a fear buried deep from something long ago. That night, he wouldn't eat, wouldn't come out from under the table, and Clara stayed on the floor beside him until he finally fell asleep just before midnight. The next morning, Clara knew she had to help Duke overcome the fear that still had a grip on him, even though he had come so far. She began by playing low recordings of sirens while sitting next to Duke, watching his face and body for signs of stress and stopping as soon as he looked uncomfortable. Slowly, day by day, she increased the volume just a little and rewarded Duke with calm praise and soft pets when he didn't panic. Over 2 weeks, Duke learned that not all loud sounds meant danger, and though his ears still twitched at sharp noises, he no longer dropped or trembled when he heard them. Clara introduced other new sounds too, garbage trucks, doorbells, and even fireworks on TV, with the same care and patience, and Duke responded with growing courage. He began walking with more confidence, holding his head a little higher, and wagging his tail when neighbors greeted him instead of hiding behind Clara's legs. One afternoon, a group of children ran past them in the park laughing and shouting, And to Clara's surprise, Duke didn't flinch. He simply paused, then continued walking calmly. A few days later, they passed by a real fire truck at the grocery store, lights spinning but sirens off, and Duke sniffed the tire without fear, earning a proud smile from Clara. These victories, while small to others, were huge for Duke, and Clara made sure he knew just how proud she was of every brave step he took. In return, Duke began showing affection in new ways, resting his head on Clara's lap, bringing her his toy ball, or nudging her hand for a pet before bedtime. Though his past had left marks on his spirit, Clara could see how much strength lived inside him, waiting to be released with trust and love. He had learned that fear doesn't last forever, and that kindness could be louder than any siren he had ever heard. Together, Clara and Duke kept moving forward, one quiet victory at a time, building a life made not just of healing, but of real happiness. And with every step they took, Duke's old fear faded a little more, replaced by a peace he had never known until he met the one person who never gave up on him. Months passed, and the seasons quietly changed, bringing brighter skies, blooming flowers, and a calm routine that both Clara and Duke had come to love and trust deeply. Clara noticed that Duke wasn't just healing, he was growing into something more, becoming braver, more curious, and surprisingly gentle with people he once would have avoided. One day at the park, a little girl dropped her ice cream cone and began to cry. And before Clara could react, Duke gently walked over and sat beside her, his presence quiet and comforting. The girl looked up, met Duke's soft eyes, and slowly reached out to pat his head, smiling as her tears faded, and her mother said, "That dog is something special." Clara started thinking about how Duke's calm and patient nature could help others who were hurting, just like he had once been. After some research, she signed them up for a local therapy dog training program, unsure if Duke would feel comfortable, but hopeful he might enjoy the experience. The first few sessions were slow and simple, with Duke learning how to greet strangers gently, stay calm in busy rooms, and walk through new places without fear. His progress amazed the instructors, who said Duke had the perfect heart and spirit for the job, and his quiet presence brought peace to everyone he met. When they visited a senior center for their first practice visit, Duke walked slowly between the rows of chairs, letting people pat him and talk to him softly. One elderly man who hadn't spoken in weeks whispered, "Good boy," as he stroked Duke's fur, and the nurses watched with tears in their eyes. Next, they visited a library where children read books out loud to dogs, and Duke lay down on a blanket while a shy boy read slowly, gaining confidence with every word. Clara sat nearby, heart full, watching Duke offer comfort and calm just by being present, his journey now helping others find strength too. Each week, they visited new places, hospitals, schools, even a shelter for families in need, and everywhere they went, Duke brought quiet joy. People asked where he came from, and Clara always shared a gentle version of his story, how he was once afraid and forgotten but found his way back through love and patience. Duke never barked or made a scene. He just listened, watched, and made people feel like they mattered, like someone truly saw them. Children who had been scared of dogs slowly reached for him, and older folks who had lost their own pets found comfort in his silent loyalty. Even the staff at the places they visited looked forward to Duke's visits, often leaving him little treats and calling him the quiet hero. Clara felt proud not only because Duke had changed, but because he had chosen to become something more than just healed. He had become a healer himself. His days of hiding in the back of a kennel were long behind him, replaced by days filled with purpose, joy, and shared moments that truly mattered. Duke had gone from a forgotten soul in a dark corner to a shining light in the lives of others, and it was all because one person had seen him and believed he still had something left to give. One bright spring morning, Clara and Duke were on their way to the local elementary school for another reading day, something both of them had come to enjoy and look forward to. As they neared the school gate, a teacher came running toward the sidewalk, shouting for help because a student had wandered off during recess and no one could find him. The school backed up to a wooded area with twisting trails, and though the boy had only been missing for 20 minutes, panic was rising fast among staff and parents. Clara's heart pounded, and before she could speak, Duke pulled gently on the leash and looked up at her with eyes full of quiet understanding. She remembered what Officer Grant had said about Duke's training, how he had once been a rescue dog, able to track people by scent and instinct. Without hesitation, Clara knelt down, took out a crumpled sweater the teacher handed her, and let Duke sniff it carefully, watching his nose twitch as he took in the smell. Duke stood still for a second, then began moving quickly but smoothly toward the tree line, his steps sure and his head low, nose to the ground like a switch had flipped inside him. Clara followed closely behind, alert but calm, calling out the boy's name softly every few steps, trusting Duke to lead the way. They weaved through the woods, past bushes and muddy paths, deeper than anyone else had searched, and Clara's shoes filled with dirt and leaves as she kept up. After what felt like forever, Duke stopped near a fallen log and let out a short, clear bark, his first real bark since she had adopted him. Clara rushed over and gasped as she saw the missing boy sitting quietly beside the log, wild but unharmed, hugging his knees and looking frightened. "It's okay," she said gently, kneeling beside him as Duke sat close and licked the boy's hand, calming him instantly without needing a single word. The boy whispered, "I didn't mean to get lost," and Clara wrapped her arms around him, holding back tears as she looked at Duke in wonder. Minutes later, teachers arrived and guided the boy back to the school, while Duke stood proudly by Clara's side, not needing praise, just happy to help. Word of Duke's actions spread quickly, and soon the story was in the newspaper, calling him a hero who saved the day without hesitation. People from all over town sent cards and treats, but Duke stayed humble, still curling up on his rug every night like nothing had changed. Clara knew, though, that something had changed, not just for the boy they found, but for Duke, who had finally stepped fully into who he was meant to be. The dog who once hid in a dark shelter corner had become a helper, a friend, and now a rescuer once again, not through command but through love. That moment in the woods wasn't just shocking, it was powerful proof that healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms it into something strong and brave. And as Duke rested his head in Clara's lap that evening, eyes calm and heart steady, she whispered, "You were never broken. You were always just waiting to be found."